Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champions Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming, presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. Every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on twitch.tv/CNE Games, or later on your favorite podcast service, Mitra and Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, talk about mental health. The laugh got me! The laugh got me! As they talk about mental health and how gaming affects us. If you have any questions and you're live here in the chat with us, you can leave them in the chat with the question : before it, and our awesome mod Martin will grab them and put them into a doc that I will read them off later in the show. But before we get to that, who are you two for the fine folks who may not know? Oh. We're muted. Hang on. I know why. Silence! Wait. I literally have to change wires around. And then we're gonna go over here. And we're gonna... Where'd you go? Stop the thing. This is great for audio listeners. You're gonna love this because you can't see anything. God, stop going away! Which one is it? No, it's not that one. Oh, well, this might be a bigger problem. Hang on, bear with us real quick. Sorry. Because there was a day off yesterday, and apparently that threw everything off for me, because that's what happens. There totally wasn't a problem with the, Thank you for the miming, Dr. B. There totally wasn't a problem with the code that I messed up before this. Okay, try talking now.
I fell!
I think the first thing they heard was I fell.
But he's getting up.
I fell!
That was very dramatic. A good start.
Oh, apologies, everyone. Yes.
Oh, look, not a hair out of place.
And it's been a long day already, so apologies. You okay there, Dr. B?
Psychomancer down.
Okay, Mitra, if you could start at the top again
Not
of who
again.
you are.
No. I don't wanna. Okay, so I'm Mitra Jordan, a therapist in private practice in Victoria, BC. Going to use my hands a lot, apparently, today. And I see individuals, couples, and youth in my practice. And I do see a number of people who were parentified as children. So
there we go.
Yeah, did my bit.
Hi, I'm Raffael Boccamazzo. In my spare time, I'm a budget Willy Wonka impersonator.
It's true.
He does his own stunts, like falling out of computer chairs.
It's also true. I thought Willy was a little bit more graceful, but what can I tell you?
I don't know. I just Oompa Loompa doopity dropped.
I want candy now. I'm going to be like the one who, what's her name? I think it was, she like swells up like the baby.
Oh, Violet.
Or Violet, yeah.
Violet, you're turning Violet.
Violet, you're turning Violet.
No, hi, I'm Raffael Boccamazzo, better known as Dr. B for long Italian name reasons. I'm a clinical psychologist in Washington State. I am the clinical director at TakeThis.org, which was at the time in 2012, the first mental health nonprofit to serve the gaming community. And if you head on over and make sure to follow us, today is the last day to nominate your favorite video game that came out in 2020 and 2021 for the Dr. Mark Award for Mental Health Representation in Games. But yeah, I'm here to also talk about parentified children and apparently fall down.
We all have our
It's-
skills.
We do.
Me and gravity. Yes.
They like to be real close.
Oh yeah. Oh,
But he's got a motto. He gets knocked down, but he gets up. He gets up again.
oh
You're
yeah.
never gonna keep him down.
Absolutely.
Never gonna keep me down.
Never going to keep him down. Never
No.
going to let him down. Never gonna-
Did we just get Rick rolled?
We did.
Did
Mitra Rick rolled
Chumbawamba
us.
turn into being Rick rolled? Wow.
This is
Never
gonna be a
going
good
to give
one.
you up.
It's gonna be a good one today.
Oh.
So,
Absolutely.
We're laughing through our traumas.
That's the one. That's them traumas that we're laughing through.
So okay, let's wind
Scene.
things back here. Parentified children. What does that mean? What is the definition of a parentified child?
Mitra, I really do want to kick this one over for you. This is really your area of expertise, much more than mine.
Okay, I love how you threw this right in my lap, but that's fair. That's fair.
I can do it.
No, that's fair. So a parentified child is a child who was expected to take on responsibilities, emotional and perhaps also in terms of tasks that would normally have been assigned to a parent. And within the culture in which the child lived, those responsibilities were still considered a parent's job. In other words, if we were to go back in time to farmhands of the 1930s, say, a 13-year-old might be expected to run a farm, but now that wouldn't be the case. So it's the expectations based on the culture that are out of line, as in this was a parent's job and you now had to do it. Further to that, a parentified child is one for whom a parent isn't holding the appropriate emotional space, but rather the expectation is that they can be related to or treated as an adult in terms of perhaps emotional content that is presented to them. So should I bring this to life by mentioning what we talked about next? Do we have any examples? Do we want to get into that?
I mean, do we have examples? I'm thinking
Examples.
of literature, like how many in TV and movies, how many the stuff that comes to mind for me is like royalty. And we have stories of child kings that or queens who ascend to the throne way too early, way too early, and become pawns in now I'm thinking of Richard III. Never mind.
Okay.
I'm going Shakespeare.
Well, he's a great source for so much, but let's kind of bring it to a very a level at which people can really kind of connect with it. How about we start there? So, for example, if two parents are going through a divorce and children are given too much information, because there's the information around, hey, mommy and daddy love you, but we're not going to be together anymore. We've got this. And here's the plan. You'll be with mom on these days. You'll be with dad on, and they're quite aligned in how they handle this. That is very different than daddy doesn't love us anymore and he's leaving us, right? Or daddy doesn't love us and you're now expected to be the man of the house.
Boy, you're just going for it. Hey, gang. This is going to be an uplifting episode. We're going for the throat right away.
There is too much information around challenges that parents are going through, whether it's financial or emotional, and the kid ends up becoming or held responsible for too much. So it's one thing if you have a single parent who's like, okay, listen, you got to get home and I need you to put the potatoes on for supper. And I need you to just make sure your brother gets a snack, and then we'll take you to your soccer game after. That is not parentification. There's room that's being held for what a child wants to do, a child's needs and a child's emotional needs. Sweetie, I know you've had a hard day. Can you just help me chop the potatoes and we'll talk about what's going on for you, is fine, especially if you have a single parent who's trying to kind of keep things afloat. But it's not fine if it's like, come here and help me chop the potatoes. I need to tell you about what happened with my boss today.
Yeah, that's a common in the limited work I've done with folks around this. That's been a common thread of being a parental confidant,
Exactly.
of being the friend of the parent in a way that would be typically reserved for an adult, because that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about having a child perform duties that within the context of a given culture are reserved for adults.
Right. I don't need to know that one of my parents is having an affair at work, right? That's not appropriate information for a child.
Probably not in the US and
I don't
Canada.
think anywhere. It's really
I'm struggling
not
to
okay.
think of an example either, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Exactly. So,
God,
and yet it happens, right?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, there's a lot of examples. A context in which parentification can happen is, say you have a disabled sibling. Often families where a sibling is quite disabled or for whatever reason just takes up a lot of resource to manage, children who are able, or at least certainly more able in that context, right, often find it hard to ask for their needs to be met because there might be a crisis here or a crisis there. And you don't end up feeling like there's enough space for you. Also, if there's a parent who's highly traumatized, or a parent who's quite sick, sometimes we're in a situation where a parent is terminal. So the able parent who's taking care of their spouse might be asking a lot of their children. This is a situation where you absolutely need, if you can, community support so that your kids can still do some kid things.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's a really tough context, but it's another one where parentification can happen, or things can be managed so that the parentification is kept to a minimum and there's support for those children who are also losing a parent.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I mean, we're talking about like children as confidants to parents in an appropriate way, not the friends of parents. And I'm not going to. I don't think we're going to really talk to, at least most of us are going to talk to an 8-year-old or 9-year-old the same way we would talk to our adult friends. But you're also talking about children as caregivers for their parents as well, for flip-flopping those roles.
Absolutely. Or caregivers for a sibling.
Yeah.
So we can get into quickly my grandmother's situation. Parents fled a genocide that was happening in what is now northern Iran. For them, it was the Assyrian genocide. My grandmother was tiny. I actually am not sure if she was tiny or actually born once they arrived in Nikopol in Ukraine, which is where she grew up. Stone's throw from Odessa, if people are wondering geographically where it might be. Somewhere near Odessa anyway. See, I'm hazy on these details. In any case, she was a single child for the first 5 years. And then in fairly quick succession, there were another 4 siblings born. And so she was the eldest of 5. And tragically, her mother died when the youngest was around a year-ish, I think. And so she got pulled out of school at around the age of 12-ish. People are quite hazy on dates back then. But she was around the age of 10, 12, 13-ish. And her father was like, well, that's enough education. Your responsibility is now taking care of your siblings while I work. And so she ended up raising her 4 siblings and running the household. And it was a real fight eventually once they moved back to Iran. It was a real fight for her to do her training as a nurse because her father just did not, see this as her job. So yeah, that was a tough experience for her growing up for sure.
Well, one of the, we're talking about parentification as a result of trauma, in this case, genocide and, refugee status. And relocation and death. We've talked about parentification from the results of ongoing health issues and potentially from systemic issues like financial difficulties and the need for everybody to be participating in the financial structure of the family. But there's something else that we don't always think about, and it's a weird thing for me to, because this has been more the context of which I did it, because when I've had a private practice in the past, a lot of the folks I served were tech families in very wealthy areas of the Seattle area. And where I often saw it was in narcissistic projection of perfectionism of the kid as an extension of the parents. And in that case, what I often saw was kids who could not mess up, kids who couldn't be kids because it would reflect poorly on the parents. Like we don't do that sort of behavior now because we're no longer in kindergarten. We're in first grade, and first graders don't act like, and here I am going, first graders act exactly like that. That is exactly how 6-year-olds are supposed to act. They mess up, but this was an avenue of parentification that I didn't expect, and I certainly wasn't taught about in grad school. Typically it was around disadvantage and tragedy, but it happens here too.
Absolutely. And I've worked with clients who've dealt with that as well. And there's a real misunderstanding in terms of developmental process when you have those kinds of expectations of your child. But narcissistic projection is a big one, where you just have this idea that your child has to reflect well on you because they're an extension of you somehow.
Essentially being
and so
you.
If they're a sort of mini you projected out, and therefore if they do the wrong thing, it looks bad on you. And it also comes up in the kind of can't you control your child sort of narrative, right? Where somehow there's this expectation that your child be perfect or be well controlled. And of course, this is preventing your child from being a child, from getting to experience play, getting to experience being goofy. And often, it means that that child doesn't necessarily have enough contact with other children.
Yeah. And it's funny. We bring up, and I just saw this in the chat, the act your age thing. And I looking back at some of the teachers that I had, it was a similar narrative in my childhood. I went to a very repressed Catholic school growing up, and there was a lot of this expectation of you should basically be little adults. And I'm like, looking back in retrospect, I'm like, no, that's not how that works. That's not how that works at all. God, no wonder I needed therapy. Holy crap. There were so many typical childhood experiences that I didn't get to have because of various elements of this idea that don't act childish. Well, I'm a child.
Yeah, exactly. And the other piece that comes into play there is it sort of prevents individuation. Like if I'm trying so hard to be like a mini adult, and I'm that connected to my parent in terms of how my behavior is supposed to be, where do I get to discover myself? So where do I get to start making choices? If I'm told what to do to that degree.
So what does this do to us?
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to ask. That's exactly what I was
going to ask. Hold on. Move your mouth. I'll do that again. So what does this do to us? Oh my God. Hold on. No, wait. No, do it again. Hold on. So what does this do to us? I did it without my lips moving. I could hold
that one. Yeah. What exactly does this do to us? Because I do have permission to talk about this. Like my wife does relate to this when I told her that this was going to be the topic. Essentially, like, I don't know the full story of like how, but she was, you were talking about the financial thing of it. She found out the finances when she was younger. And so she started making her own decisions about what they could and couldn't afford for her. So
Yeah.
she would say no to something she wanted to do because she was worried about the finances when she was a child and shouldn't be having to worry about that. And that has carried over into adulthood for her, where she is still worried about this, but because she kept it in as a child, is still keeping it in. And we, I have to remind her, I'm just like, hey, we can have a conversation about this. Like, we can talk about this and figure out how all of that, how we can make that work. So what does it do generally to folks?
Well, it means that, first of all, they might not have a good sense of what the boundaries are and whose responsibility certain tasks actually are. So often with my clients who've experienced parentification, if the parentification has been, if they've been invited in to their parents' internal worlds too much, they start to feel responsible for those internal worlds. And often when I'm talking to younger clients who are struggling with this, I might say, you know what, it's okay to know about like that, but that doesn't mean you have to take care of it. And really helping them understand that recognizing something your parents are going through doesn't mean that your parents get to abstain or abdicate their role as parents. You still have needs and you still have a right to have those needs met. And in fact, you shouldn't really have to have a conversation with your parents about that, because they should be looking out for your needs. But that will often happen. So it'll be like, yeah, that's okay, but it's still their job. And I often find myself reminding my younger clients that it's their job, or adults who've been through this, that yeah, that was your parents' job. I'm sorry that didn't, what happened instead? Tell me, because it's not, it's this piece around responsibility gets to be a real problem if you're talking about what your wife experienced, Treavor. So yeah, she made some internal decisions about who was responsible and what she would ask so as not to put pressure on a situation, but she was coming from a child place, and so it's really hard to know what you should or shouldn't ask. And this is similar to families where one child is disabled. The abled children will often not ask for their needs to be met, and they're not clear, as children aren't, on what their needs are anyway. So it's really difficult for people coming from these kinds of backgrounds to know how to make space and to ask for their needs to be met, because that's not a thing that happened. How do I know what my needs get to be when I haven't had the experience of having them met? So as an adult, you end up taking on far too much in terms of often emotional responsibility for your partners and even for your kids. Of course, you're emotionally responsible for your kids, but it's important to developmentally know when they can start to make more decisions for themselves. And it can be very difficult for an adult who was parentified. I was going to say parentificated. That works too. For a parentificated adult,
children
to know how to kind of balance out, when is my child old enough to do certain things and when is it my responsibility? So it works both ways.
Well, and I mean, you bring up so one of the things that we've talked about in the past on this show is power differentials. And with this idea that there are different kinds of social dynamics and power differentials that work in different contexts. If you're at work, your boss holds certain power. If you are in a social situation, certain people in your group hold social power that people want to follow and so forth. And when it's in a family dynamic, typically speaking, parents have a lot of power, and it's hard to argue with that as a child, because you're not supposed to, when you're 6 years old, tell mom and dad, no, I will not make financial decisions for you, parents. I mean, not if you even have the language to say it like that. But so a lot of times this becomes a learned behavior that later in life you self-sacrifice to an unhealthy degree.
Absolutely.
Saying no is not, it's weird to think about, but saying no is something we have to learn. Standing up for ourselves is something we have to learn. Good boundaries like that is something we have to learn. And, you know, a lot of parentified children, by the time they get to be adults, they self-sacrifice to a really unhealthy degree.
Yeah, and it's really hard for them to know what those boundaries are, because those boundaries were never held for them. So often in relationship, they'll take on too much and ask for too little back. And then that has a cost, of course. You know, we can't be martyrs. So the cost can be resentment, anger.
Says you, I was raised Catholic. We've got a whole thing about them.
So real quick, let's take a quick break to remind our viewers and listeners of our disclaimer, and then we'll talk about more about what this can do to us when that happens. So we'll be right back.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
We are back. As you can see, the other host, we're having a tea break.
You heathen, this is espresso.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Of course it is espresso. This is Earl Grey tea. And I will have you know, I like a good large mug
This is
of Earl
empty
Grey
and I'm
tea.
sad.
This is a distressing topic.
Yeah. You needed your comfort tiara and your comfort espresso.
My comfort tiara. And apparently I'm Julia Child now. I don't know why.
There's half a stick of butter in this small cup.
Today on Champions of Psychology,
Deglaze with a generous amount of red wine.
Yep.
Sorry, couldn't
That's
help
Champion
myself.
Psychology, taking a break from the trauma to have a few laughs.
We laugh so we don't cry.
Yes. I like that. Chatter Chat's empathy.
I love that.
That's
I love
so
that.
good.
That's fantastic. Yes, Tea Earl Grey Hot Picard is definitely a hero in that way. And I wish it were that easy.
Pebble and Ranger, save the chicken.
Who will think of the chickens?
Oh, yes.
Which really does bring us back to topic, because who's thinking about the children? You know, in terms of parent education, I kind of feel that works.
So yeah, what other long-term things can parentified children have?
Well, one of the things I see with kids who've gone through a lot in terms of trauma and parentification in childhood is that they really have to work hard in terms of their becoming parents, in terms of being parents, because they cannot, like many parents who've had struggles as children, they cannot draw upon their childhood experience in order to support their own kids, because that didn't work. And so you end up working hard to give your children the childhood you didn't have. And in fact, to give your children a childhood. And that's wonderful and really important work, and also very, very healing work. But it does come at a bit of a cost. For some of my parents, it brings up a lot of grief because of what they didn't have, because it's clear what their kids have.
Yeah.
It's clear what the benefits are of a loving family, of committed parents, of children just getting to be kids, you know. And I think that brings up two pieces for them, the grief and loss, and also sometimes resentment against their own parents because without the resources themselves, right? Without the resources of being able to draw upon their own childhood. They have figured out how to be good parents. They have loved their children and they have worked at it and they have done it. And looking at their parents, there is a very clear question. Why couldn't you do the same?
Well, in this, we're often getting into questions of intergenerational trauma here because, you know, this is something that we're, at least in my professional circles, we're starting to hear about more and more. It's becoming more of a mainstream conversation where the trauma doesn't stop with one person. It has effects that happen down the line, and you're talking about this grief and processing that comes along with recognition that I didn't necessarily have the typical, the culturally typical experiences that my peers had. Subsequently, I don't have the culturally anchored memories that my peers have. And I want to give them to my kids, but in some cases, I don't know how.
Right.
And that is a complicated thing to navigate, because now the kids are going to see that. Now the kids are going to see that in their parents. We talked a little bit about this in our episode on immigration. Like my dad was first generation in the country, and while I didn't see the direct effects of immigration, I saw the reverbs on him, and it had ramifications on me. Trauma has similar stuff down the line.
Oh, sorry. Babylon Ranger in the chat said trauma has ripples.
Trauma does have ripples.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think we have to take those ripples seriously, because otherwise we might discount that experience and how, while it's amazing when your parents get through something that's really difficult for them, but that doesn't mean that hasn't taken a toll on them, and that doesn't and hasn't and won't affect you. So this is where it's really important to pay attention to the effect of trauma in our own lives so that we can be the parents we want to be.
Well, and what about the identity confusion? Because it doesn't matter what culture you're brought up in. There are culturally anchored touchstones that, we're supposed to, we're quote unquote supposed to have.
Oh, well, I can certainly give you an example. So my mother didn't have a lot of the rites of passage met by her family. In other words, you know how it is when you graduate primary school, and there's usually a little event, and then you start secondary school, and then you have like a prom of some sort, right? And you have a grad ceremony, right? So my mom didn't have any of those, and neither did my aunt. Due to various reasons and family moving around internationally, it just didn't happen. And also, neither of their weddings were attended. They were both sort of registry weddings and real quick things. And so the first thing I noticed was that, I didn't go to my own high school graduation. And when I got married, I wanted a wedding, and my family had a very odd response to it. They were like, well, but you're 30, you're kind of old. Why don't you just go ahead and get married? Why do you need to have a wedding?
Huh.
Yeah, I know. And I remember being kind of dumbfounded by this and going, no, we are having a wedding.
Yeah.
Which ended up being a lot of fun and quite wonderful. And they still talk about it to this day. And it was a good idea that I did that. But it was really interesting. But it sort of kickstarted something where family members came out to my graduation. They came out to my master's graduation. They came out for my 50th birthday. Yes, I'm old. And, they were there for things that they hadn't considered celebrating themselves. And so this was a part of it. There was a real loss of those rites of passage because of their own experience, where they were somewhat parentified in their families.
Well, I'm also thinking about this stuff that I'm also thinking about some of the stuff that you brought up a little bit ago, Mitra. And again, I'm going to talk about my own family situation in this as well. In many respects, my father, being the son of very poor Italian immigrants, had a parentified role in the house.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of moments in my childhood where my dad was honestly kind of confused about what the typical experience was. And this is something I've heard from other adults who grew up as parentified children with their own children. They are, in some cases, confused on what are the culturally relevant and appropriate ways to raise a child. What are the boundaries that they never learned themselves? What are, there's just a lot of confusion having never been taught that stuff.
And then you throw in, of course, as you say, immigration, right, or migration, and you end up having even more issues, because what are the rites of passage that your children are growing up with that you didn't grow up with? What are the expectations of childhood within this different cultural context?
Oh, and then you throw in the fact that he had an autistic kid that they didn't know, and
Yeah.
that's confusing situation.
And that's a big deal, actually, when you've got children who have some challenges, and especially if they're neurodivergent, and you really haven't necessarily grown up in a situation where you've been aware of that. I mean, generationally, it's different as well, but certainly across cultures, it's different. Yeah, absolutely. So how do we catch these things, and how do we deal with them if a teacher points them out? Hey, your kid needs some extra help, right? And that's, that's either not okay or not easy to understand. So.
Oh, now I'm just picturing a choose your own adventure instruction manual for children.
God.
If autistic, turn to page 37.
I do want to read this out real quick because I enjoyed this. Lurking writer in the chat said, 50 is not old unless you're an Aarakocra. There's your link to D&D for the stream. Now back to the discussion.
Yes. No, the cleric fell down. We started, the cleric has a dex of 8. That is the problem from the get-go. I tripped while sitting in my chair. You all saw it.
Let it be known.
I rolled a 1 at sitting.
That's fair.
Only momentarily, but sure. Did you?
Did you roll a
20?
You rolled a 20? Hey!
I rolled a 20! I get to stay in my seat for the next 20 minutes.
Okay.
God, I hope I don't
glad
fall
about
now.
that. Don't fall. That would be a real... That would be a betrayal of that nat 20 you just rolled.
Speaking of the next 20 minutes, we do have a few questions. Remember, chat, you can put questions in the chat, and our awesome mod Martin will grab them and put them in this text doc. But is there any other things that you want to touch on about parentified children before we pass it over to them?
If you find yourself falling into this category, for whatever reason, give yourself a break. Have some compassion. It's a complicated journey to come out of it. And hopefully you have a good mental health professional by your side throughout the course, because there's like Mitra brought up, there are a whole series of complicated, conflicting emotions of relief and anger and sadness and loss and grief and hope. It's oogie.
Because we're talking about children, you said take a break. I was immediately like, yeah, grab a Capri Sun, sit down on the couch.
Recess.
Yeah,
exactly.
Recess. There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Have some recess. Let's see. For chat, Revro wants his question: is it known how much more often a child becomes parentified in marginalized communities?
That's an interesting question. And I would suspect that there can be more parentification in marginalized communities, because often there might be more challenges, more resources, fewer resources to meet a child's needs, but both parents might be working. There might be greater expectations on children in terms of responsibilities within the home. I want to stress, though, that doesn't necessarily lead to parentification. You can have more responsibilities, but is there enough emotional space held for you? Is there enough appreciation of you as a child and freedom to be a child at certain times, right? And that's the big one. Are you given too much information? Are there expectations placed on you that your friends in that same community don't have? Like, those are questions to be looking at.
And that's something I know that Mental Lamia answered directly in the chat a little bit ago, and looks like just again. And Mental Lamia is one of the people I would actually go to for one of those questions. Mitra and Mental Lamia are two folks on my list, so I'm going to just refer to their answer in the chat because it's probably pretty solid.
Yeah. Actually, I'll read that one out because, you know, for audio listeners, Ms. Lamia says, Black and Latin experience higher levels of parentification than white people in the United States. This is directly related to systematic oppression and economic disadvantage.
100%. And we see this with marginalized communities and communities of color, definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, in Canada as well. Thank you.
This is from Chamber X77. I assume there is to be a hopefully obvious line that has to be crossed before it becomes parentification.
You know, I love that question for anything in psychology because my answer is always two words. What are the 2 words in chat? What are the 2 words? It depends.
Yeah, I think this is one of the, often what people experience is this lack of boundaries or very mushy boundaries. And so, yes, there are obvious lines if somebody says, dad's having an affair with his secretary. Sorry, we've really crossed the line there, and it's pretty clear. But there's a lot of mushiness around a kid sort of starting to too much responsibility, and sorry, you can't go to art class, by the way, and I need you to do this, without any clear boundaries about when is it happening. It's very different if it's like, grandma was going to come sit your younger brother so you could go to art class, and unfortunately she can't make it today, so you're going to miss art class this week, but I'll make sure I have things in place for next week, is not parentification, right? Because life happens. But if too consistently a kid's needs are being shunted aside because of parents who are in chaos or not able to manage supports for their kids, and they're starting to now ask for much more. So I need you to take care of your little brother because I can't be there, so now it's your job today, is not great, right? And if it's your job next week and it suddenly becomes your job over time, that's parentification. You're having to take too much responsibility and you're not getting to be a kid.
Mitra's made a couple of amazing points during the show, and also really overtly during our pre-production meeting, that it's not an all or nothing concept. It's not like a line you cross and you can never go back. Structure of support is important because, are we talking like a temporary, you're helping around the house while both parents are working overtime for a couple months, or and then they recognize that and you're also helping out in developmentally appropriate ways? Or are you talking about being mom or dad's confidant for years while they are overtly telling you to discipline your younger siblings and also manage the budget? Those are very, very different circumstances.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said.
Let's see. Simon's 13579. Did you ever do a show on intergenerational trauma? I would like to see that one. Yeah, we did do that one.
I think we did.
Yeah, sort of.
Was it in season 1 or 2? I think it was fairly early on.
I actually think that one might have been recent. We do have our videos up on YouTube on the Codename Entertainment YouTube channel, so you can find those there. And if you haven't been there recently and you're upset because they were all named the same thing, that's been fixed by our awesome friend Mars, who went through and recategorized and updated everything.
Yay!
So
I've got a question. Could we incorporate I saw this in the chat. Could we incorporate "It Depends" as our slogan underneath the Champions of Psychology logo. I really love that idea. Or maybe we do it in Latin, like "Dependante" or something like that. I don't.
Yeah.
I was raised Catholic. I didn't pay attention. But
I
that's
can
why I only got half the guilt.
I can talk to our amazing wizard of a graphic designer, Maddie, and see if they can do that.
That would be good, because it really is so context dependent.
Yeah.
Or context changes everything might be another.
And "It Depends" emote suggests Chamber X77. That would be a really good emote.
That would be good.
Take this, might think about that one.
Yeah, I definitely.
I'll talk to our community director.
Yeah. But also we do, like I said at the beginning of the show, we do have a podcast feed as well. So if you go to any of your podcast channels and look up Champion Psychology, you can find all of our episodes up on there. Let's see here. I think we're gonna round out this one with a slightly off-topic one, but I still think it's a nice check-in. The Lurking Writer says, question: how are y'all doing this week? Hope you're well.
I've been having a lingering bout of not COVID, as has everyone in my family. It involves sort of cough and cold symptoms and general malaise and tiredness. My mood is good, but I'm really sick of this.
You're sick of being sick.
I am, and we've all done the COVID tests over and over, and they're negative. So like, it's not COVID. That's what I'm calling it. So if you find yourself experiencing not COVID, there is absolutely something going around. It also involves stomach aches sometimes. It's very nebulous and hard to contain. It doesn't have good boundaries.
How about you, Dr. B?
Rat with Wings called me out. I have my emotional support espresso. I have my comfort tiara. Adulting sucks.
Yeah.
Adulting sucks. I'm it's just to talk and normalize it. I'm actually in the process of looking for I have a therapist, but I'm looking for a psychiatrist, and it sucks even if you know what you're doing, even if you're within the system, and because also you know what to not look for. And for me to find a psychiatrist who is competent at working in an autism affirming manner is a significant challenge. Yeah. Because, quite frankly, most of us in the mental health field were taught a lot of bad lessons about autism that we have to unlearn. Yeah. And I would really like to not pay them to teach them.
It's fair.
So that's why I have my comfort espresso and my comfort tiara.
Well, I'm glad you have both of those things, because that definitely sounds like you need a moment.
It's okay. It's just work. It's inconvenient. Yeah. But hopefully that normalizes things for a lot of other folks that do. It sucks looking for a mental health professional right now. Doesn't matter who you are, even if you're a doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. It just sucks right now.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. It's hard to find someone good. It's also really difficult if you're looking within the system here. The wait lists for psychiatrists, even if you're a youth, are really appalling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, as for me, had a long weekend of self-care because it started off with my back hurting so bad that I nearly threw up several times. But I got to watch all of the new Stranger Things seasons, so that was great. And yeah, just trying to catch up on everything and trying to have a good week. So thank you for asking, Lurking Writer.
Thank you for
Shorzy.
asking.
Watch Shorzy.
We heard a lot about that before the show, so you all also must
watch
Shorzy. But yeah, I think that's where we're gonna have to start wrapping things up, because we've got a show coming up right afterwards. Friends, where can people find you, and if they'd like to do so on the internet?
So I can be found at mitrajordan.com, and I can be found at Mitra Jordan on Twitter. And those are pretty much the two places you can find me, unlike my esteemed colleague, who is...
I may be found on Cooking with Psychology.
Please
I need
do
that
a
show.
Take This cooking show.
I think we need.
I
Yeah.
have suggestions of people to be on. Oh my gosh, that would be
Cooking
amazing.
show.
It's a cooking show of just cook your comfort food. Like
oh
just
my
cook,
God,
yeah.
I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Cook
We,
your
we should
comfort-
do that.
Comfort
in.
with comfort
I'm
cooking
in.
with Dr. B.
I
Yeah.
that
Oh
would
my
be
God.
amazing.
Oh no, that's great. But you can find me on all the social medias at the Dr. B. That's TheeDoctor, B as in boy. But it's more important that you follow Take This org for all keeping up to date on all the cool mental health stuff we are doing, including today being the last day to nominate your favorite mental health themed game of 2020 and 2021 for the Dr. Mark Award of 2022. It's going to be, I have some great favorites that came out in the last 2 years. I hope you do too.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the Treavor. There's an A hiding in there. You can also find me anywhere the Idle Champions community is, because I'm the community manager, and that's where I'll be.
Woohoo.
Yeah, so let's see. We've got Bardic Inspiration coming up immediately after this with special guest Mark Meir. Definitely stick around for that and help.
Mark's so cool.
Mark's so cool.
He is really
So
cool.
And suggest lyrics and help them write a song. I believe, even though I don't have the Twitch schedule up on all of the usual platforms, again, it was a day off and I've been in meetings all morning, so I apologize. I think we have a pretty normal week of streaming, so stay tuned and hope you enjoy it. But that is going to do it for this week's episode. Oh, thank you, Martin, for moderating in chat. Doing an awesome job. I remember to do it. Thank you to Codename and Take This for letting us have these conversations. That is going to do it for this week's episode. So until next week, take care of yourself.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.